things are happening with Luka right now.
One more. Shoot it.
And from near the hash mark, 42! And a long time to play. That is his fourth foul of the game.
Give up one to get a great one. Luka in rhythm.
Welcome to Inside The Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside The Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video as well. We continue to get you ready for the Mavericks taking on the Los Angeles Clippers in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. And I'm so happy to welcome back to the podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Grant Afseth, covering the Dallas Mavericks for Sports Illustrated. Grant Afseth back on the podcast with me. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. I'm looking forward to having some playoff basketball to cover. Definitely after last year, looking forward to having that opportunity.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And for the Mavericks fans, it's been a hell of a season, the ups and downs of this season, but at the same time, a team that's back in the postseason after missing last year, finishing 38-44. It's well chronicled how the Mavericks went 5-11 with Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving playing together, but these two this year creating offensive music and magic all season long now sees them taking on maybe Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, James Harden, and the rest of the Clippers group in the first round of these playoffs. Before we dive into anything specific, your thoughts on just this matchup in general and what it means for this group, given the fact that they've gone through everything with the trades with PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, playing a different style that the Mavericks are at this point. What are your overall thoughts on what this series could present to us this year?
Yeah, I think it'll be a fascinating one considering, these teams haven't played since, I believe, December with, the first 3 games or only 3 games of their season series being so early in the season. And, both teams have kind of gone through those changes, as you mentioned with the Mavericks and their trade deadline moves. The Clippers went through that James Harden trade pretty early in the year. Mavericks were one of the first teams, relatively speaking, I think like 5 games in to play the Clippers, blew them out, and then lost the next 2 games. But, they didn't have, all their key players. Like the Mavericks didn't have, their superstar backcourt for all 3 games. They didn't have Derek Lively available, I'm pretty sure, for, that season series as well, too. Like he did participate, but not the entire season series. They added PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. So, very important parts of their current team weren't even involved in the season series. So I think we're going to learn a lot about how they match up against each other very early in what, tends to be that feel out game in game 1, but even more so with teams that are, coming to, face each other with different pieces that weren't involved in this overall matchup. So I'm curious to see how that goes, especially for a Mavericks team that was so small, early in the year. Now they have not only Daniel Gafford to have, a 2-headed sort of monster approach for the front court with the center position, but they also have another big wing that has solved a lot of issues with PJ Washington playing next to Derek Jones. So definitely those are types of talents you need when you play against a team that's got the superstars like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So seeing how that makes a difference was definitely going to be an overall just underlying intrigue for this playoff series.
Yeah, it's a tale of a series where kind of something has to give, really. And it's ironic because the things that may have to give is something I don't think we expected, because for the Clippers, we knew that offensively they were going to be pretty good, and they lived up to the building. They were 4th in the NBA in offensive rating this year. What we didn't know was the fact that the Mavericks, in the most meaningful games where they went 16-2 in that 18-game stretch, and really since the beginning of February, have been the best defense in the NBA. So the fact that we're talking about arguably one of the best offenses in the league versus, yes, Mavericks fans, one of the best defenses in the league is not something that I think we thought we would see coming into the series. And I think that really changes the view on how I think a lot of Mavericks fans feel about their opportunity to see this team be able to deal with Kawhi Leonard, however much we may see him, Paul George, James Harden, and to a lesser degree, Russell Westbrook, because this offense for the Clippers is potent. And for a team that at one point went 26-5 in a 31 game stretch. The Mavericks had a similar run where they went 24-7 in a 31 game stretch. So these two teams, in a lot of ways, the way that they've gotten here may have been different throughout portions of the season, but two really good teams that present each other with a lot of different challenges. And we'll start obviously with Luka and Kyrie, because how they dictate what happens offensively for the Mavericks is going to tell us a lot about this series against the Clippers.
Yeah, you're going to run a lot through Luka, as you always do, and he's going to find success no matter what scheme or personnel he's going to face. But Kyrie, as you mentioned, that's the big difference between previous years where they faced the Clippers in the playoffs, because there wasn't a reliable secondary option. A lot of switching happened with the Clippers in those previous series, and Kristaps Porzingis struggled to handle smaller guards even in the post and things of that nature. There were shortcomings there. So there's a big difference when you can trust like a dynamic, whether it's a secondary pick and roll creator or an ISO threat or just anything that has to do with scoring and the basketball touching his hands. Kyrie Irving can pretty much do, whether it's off the catch or making the play himself. So that's a big factor in this overall series. It's very hard to load up on one player and then also have to account for that other player. And I think some of the underrated elements of this too, or I guess some of the finer details that you kind of can take advantage of if you're the Mavericks, is that when you involve those two together in actions, whether it's like Luka screening for Kyrie or vice versa, we mostly see Kyrie screen for Luka. The other team is going to have to be very cognizant of their matchups. They're going to have to give up matchups they don't want to give, because you don't want to just allow Luka or Kyrie to turn the corner going right with momentum and not having someone to cut them off in position. So those are the little things that you don't necessarily have in previous series meetings between these teams when you have, like Tim Hardaway Jr. as that screener, as that primary, option coming to set those guard screens. And against a team with a lot of versatility defensively like the Clippers, you need to have those options to kind of pick your battles and be more tactical in your approach. And also, the Mavericks have shown an intriguing ability to use different screening actions with Kyrie and Luka, whether they're like double drag screeners and one of the superstars is like the first screener, or they get into like stack pick and roll with one of them as the back screener. And that stuff definitely makes the defense have to make tough decisions. And having that option to throw out different looks, just like the defense is going to throw out different looks, definitely makes this an intriguing overall sort of chess match, if you will, because there are a lot of options when you have that level of talent that can get it done in different ways. Kind of how that's applied throughout a 7-game series is definitely going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see, because obviously with Luka and Kyrie, their abilities to play off ball, their abilities to handle the ball will make defenses have to make real difficult decisions on how they're going to defend them. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about a guy in Zubac, who, of course, we know that Luka likes making him in the barbecue chicken every time he sees him on the floor. But I wonder if Ty Lue looks at a situation with Zubac and says, look, we'll put you on either Derek Jones or someone else, have him involved in screening action. That way, you're kind of relegating Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively, who was ever on the floor, maybe into a space where they're not getting involved in pick and roll actions, which kind of neutralizes some of the vertical game. Do you see some of that being anticipated potentially in this series to try and somehow neutralize the effectiveness of Luka Dončić's ability to get downhill and to find guys at the rim, especially be able to finish out of the dunker spot and things of that nature in that way?
Yeah, I can definitely see that being a factor at some point. I think they'll kind of toggle through different options throughout the series. I think something that the Clippers have taken pride in is Zubac's drop coverage. That's something where he's been one of the more efficient rim protectors in the NBA. So I'm curious to see how they start out, what their base look is, and if it's going to be drop or if they're going to try to switch. It'll be interesting. I think if you are going to switch, that would be the most logical approach, in my opinion, is to kind of do what a lot of these other teams did, like even dating back to, kind of around those New Orleans and Washington matchups very, very early in the season when, Valanciunas or, Daniel Gafford at the time was actually, on the other end of that matchup. He was the one, those players, would end up, guarding, Derek Jones, like the weak shooter, they like to call him, like just the weakest link, shooting the basketball on the court at a given time. So that would definitely be a logical approach if you are going to switch. I think it would be very challenging for the Clippers to kind of embrace like blitzing, in my opinion, because you're that 4-on-3, as Luka likes to say, is his favorite outcome. And, as crazy as a lot of people like hear that, is like it's kind of like a lot of people would think a superstar wants to make plays with the ball and kind of worry about their stats, but he's after the Houston Rockets game in early April, he mentioned I actually really like when they blitz me because where it's 4-on-3 basketball. That's something that he frequently mentions, and I don't know if you want to play 4-on-3 basketball as a defense, when you're going to have to deal with Kyrie Irving and other players that are far more capable of attacking off the dribble, whether it's, Derek Jones, PJ Washington, compared to previous, wing options that this team has had in recent years. So, that really brings the problem to where you're going to have to live with tough, decisions if you're the Clippers defense. And, as you mentioned, one of them can be that option of kind of sticking the center on the weak shooter and trying to neutralize that high pick and roll sort of option that the Mavericks like to get to with Luka, and that's the scary part overall. Is it's like you don't want to live with high pick and roll with Luka, you don't want to live with Kyrie and Luka attacking mismatches in favorable matchups in ISO and getting downhill, because this was the type of approach that Ime Udoka took, where we want the superstar to work, we're going to switch and try to take away the pick and roll game. Well, literally the highest scoring ISO games of the Mavericks season were like 40 plus points out of ISO, where Luka went off the first game and then he didn't quite have it as much as Kyrie the second game, and Kyrie filled almost the same amount of points. So it's like that's what you do with team building, is you have those options to take apart other strategies that teams are going to deploy against you. And I just think it'll be interesting to see how Ty Lue approaches it, but I do think that would be the right approach to start out with if you are going to switch. But they do seem pretty confident in their drop coverage techniques overall with their coverages in that standpoint. That's something that they seem. I just read comments and stuff on like how people have covered the team late in the season. That seems to be a pride point for them. But also, just overall, you can't live with that with Luka for too long. So curious to see how they approach this overall.
Yeah, because you talked about the idea of whether or not you decide to blitz him. If you don't blitz Luka Dončić, you can find yourself on the other end of a 73-point night like the Atlanta Hawks did. For a team that blitzed as much as anyone in the league, they decided not to, and they just watched Luka just go off and get to the rim at will, and, of course, the efficiency at which he did it with. I'm not saying Luka's going to go off for 73 at any point in the series, although he could because he's Luka. But at the same time, these are the dilemmas and decisions that defenses are going to have to make, because if you blitz him, he's going to pick you apart, and if you don't, he can pick you apart off of isolation by himself. It makes a lot of things difficult for Ty Lue to make these decisions. But for him, he's fortunate because he does have several guys that can defend, namely Kawhi Leonard, if he is playing the series. I'm interested in your perspective on this because as good as the Clippers are, they're an older version of what they were, obviously, from 2020 and 2021, and the youth and the athleticism and the explosion that the Dallas Mavericks now have, which is, again, something we couldn't say at the beginning of the year before they acquired, obviously, Derek Lively in the draft and PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. How do you think that plays into this series, given that the Clippers like to play at a lot slower pace and the Mavericks really like to push pace and have been one of the top 10 teams in terms of pace all season long this year?
Yeah, I think it plays a huge part, because if you're going to try to play that slow it down game, like as you mentioned with the Clippers being a slower paced team, you ideally want to have a rim protector on the court at all times to have the front of the rim protected and make the offense have to take shots they don't necessarily want to live with. That makes it easier for someone like Derek Jones or PJ Washington to be more rigid about forcing a star's certain drive direction and getting them, as Jason Kidd mentioned, during this week of practice, they want to get guys to their second or third move whenever they're attacking. And, if you're making someone attack and use a counter, they're not getting all the way to the rim, most likely, and you can use your length to contest and pressure, tough short range shots, tough floaters, or at least funnel straight to the rim protector to where you're going to have a lower percentage look than that typical spread it out ISO. You only have smalls on the court, and you're kind of hoping it's more of a one-on-one situation, or you're living where you're on the other side of that. We're going to double this guy and face the consequences, because overall I'm very curious. It sounds very oddly specific, But something that's really stuck out in recent years against Kawhi Leonard has been the Mavericks just real intent to double team him in the post. He's usually been parked on the block and played decoy, and they've been picked apart by guys like Norman Powell and Paul George on the weak side. And also in general, I remember in December they struggled with the offensive glass for one of these games. Like Russell Westbrook was really aggressive attacking the offensive boards, and Terrence Mann as well too. I think they each had like 3 or 4 offensive rebounds in a single game, like each of them, not collectively. So I think you're gonna have to really close possessions and have a focus throughout the whole possession if you are going to use strategies like that, because the weak side will make you pay, whether it's Norman Powell attacking a closeout, Paul George hitting a 3, or Russell Westbrook or Terrence Mann crashing the offensive board. So it's a lot of discipline that will be required against a team like that if you're going, or any team in the playoffs, if you're going to use aggressive strategies. So definitely curious how that's going to factor in. But having that rim protector changes that overall, because you can overload the strong side. You can flood side of the floor with putting a rim protector in the front of the paint as well, and then kind of rotating on the back end accordingly. And not having a rim protector and having Grant Williams at the 5 and things like that is a big difference compared to having 2 setters at all times that you can kind of throw out there. And it's not even just having like a big body to put out there in general. It's having that mentality of, all right, if I go and gun for this block or I'm aggressive and foul, I'm going to have someone who can step in for me. And I don't care if I have to get in some foul trouble. I'm going to make plays, and the net result will be a positive. That's a big difference, even from having only Derek Lively and not having someone like Daniel Gafford inside that center rotation as well. But overall, I think the Mavericks are, pretty solidly equipped to handle those individual situations. Like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, you got to match them with some wing size and length. Derek Jones, he's a thin-framed wing, but he's definitely someone that can chase you around, like pin down screens and stuff like that. And Paul George is very effective being put into different like off-ball actions. And having someone like PJ Washington to kind of bang with Kawhi Leonard and use a 7'2" wingspan, whatever it may be, like that's a unique factor that they did not have early this season, but also in recent years. I mean, Dorian Finney-Smith would probably check those similar boxes to an extent, but when you trade away for Kyrie Irving and you can replace that sort of wing defensive void, that makes you a far more capable team facing some of those prior relatively similar matchups. But then again, overall, another factor to take into account is James Harden and that pick and roll with Zubac. That's where you need a 7-footer, because they're creative with using multiple screeners as well too, like I described the Mavs offense being, where they have a shooting threat that's very tough to account for, and they're attacking out of like double drag and stuff like that. And when you have James Harden attacking left, hard left and getting to space, and he's able to throw those late lobs or just finish himself, that's a tough sort of basketball equation to solve for in real time. So just a lot of little things like that are going to be games within the game that are going to be fascinating to keep tabs on how the Mavericks approach and how they adjust when things do and don't work.
Yeah, a lot of different X's and O's and elements to this series that'll be a chess match, particularly for Ty Lue and Jason Kidd to have to figure out. What we'll do is on the other side of the break, we'll dive more into what specifically these teams will have to do in order to find themselves winning this series when it comes to the Mavericks and the Clippers. Before we get there, let's take a quick break here on Inside the Mavs and hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up. so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Appreciate you hanging out with us through that quick break. And thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast, in Aura, with Grant Abseth. As we get you ready for the Mavericks taking on the Clippers in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs, these teams meeting each other for the third time in the last 5 years. But Grant, two completely different teams, two completely different organizations. In fact, for the Mavericks, Luka, really the only starter left from that team, from the Mavericks, who faced the Clippers the very first time around back in 2020 in the bubble. And for him, Luka has been spectacular throughout his postseason, averaging over 33 points per game in the postseason, nearly 10 assists, nearly 9 rebounds. Like, his postseasons have been spectacular, but it feels like, and one of the things that we've discussed throughout the course of the week here is beating this particular team seems like is a hurdle that he's got to eventually just get through in order to become, hopefully an NBA champion at some point. How does his supporting cast, we've talked about it with with Kyrie Irving, but the other guys, when it comes to PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., Dante Exum, Daniel Gafford, the returning Derek Lively as well, how do these individuals be able to support Luka in a way, and Kyrie to a lesser degree, on what that means for this matchup and how they can really get after the Clippers in this series?
Yeah, definitely. I think with any matchup for, identity around, or team identity around Luka Dončić for high level postseason success, you're going to look at needing that superstar complement. They check that box, and then you're going to need a effective defense, like a very good defense. That was the recipe to get to the conference finals a couple of years ago, where they could swim around the half court with versatility defensively, but they didn't have rim protection. That was one of the challenges that they had to live with, getting kind of blasted on the boards at times. They were unable to really have that imposing interior presence to make pressure on the opposing team from attacking the paint, whether it's with perimeter players just getting into the paint, getting by their man, and things of that nature. But I think that would require a lot of extra efforts. And this time around, they have those rim protectors, as we mentioned already as well, but also the wing defense, they have that as well too, with PJ Washington, Derrick Jones. And I'm curious to see, in terms of a minutes distribution standpoint, if you're able to kind of heighten those minutes for those guys, how often are you not going to have like some perimeter defensive options out there? But I think another element, an X factor, if you will, I think is Dante Exum, because he kind of brings that size on the perimeter, but he also brings the ability to make plays for teammates, get into the paint himself. And he's shown confidence to knock down perimeter shots when they're daring him to shoot. So they have like 3 really solid options to put out there as role players to, do different sets of skills, but they all are positives defensively and can make life challenging on whoever they're really guarding on the perimeter. Like Dante Exum, I guess you could say in a past life, if you will, with the Utah Jazz, and James Harden in a past life, in a sense, when he was like a MVP level player. Dante Exum, made things challenging on him, guarding him in a playoff series, with the Jazz and the Rockets. So that's quite literally a direct match in terms of something he's capable of doing. But also with PJ Washington and Derrick Jones, they have 2 different types of perimeter defenders that can really, slow down, or at least stifle, make things annoying for someone like Kawhi or Paul George. Like, as we mentioned, if you're going to navigate off-ball screens, you need someone agile who's going to, get skinny on screens, get through, and have the length to pressure and contest. And that's something Derrick Jones can do very effectively. PJ Washington has more size to his frame. He can take hits, take contact. And, having those 2 different types of options goes a long way, and kind of sets the tone in a sense. But also, late in games, we've seen Dante Exum with that overall skill set being able to step in and provide, that all those intangibles we've already talked about, but concentrated in that late game situation. And now where it gets really interesting is where the Mavericks can get creative, offensively with things they've already shown, like a superstar being in a screening action is cool, but how about when both of them are and Dante Exum's handling the ball? Like that's a really tough calculus to have. And if they're all in the middle of the floor, like playing out of horn sets or double drag, like they've shown at times to be willing to do, that's really tough for the Clippers to have to account for. But overall, to answer, the overall premise of what these guys have to do, it's very important that the Clippers aren't able to basically capitalize on some of these guys missing threes, like Derrick Jones and PJ Washington. Lately they've been designated. Well, Derrick Jones really his whole career has been designated one of those weak shooters who is inefficient, inconsistent. But they've shown the ability to heat up from three for games where they're making 5 or 6 threes. This season. So if they can, they're not saying they have to do that to to be able to check the box, but if they can be consistent from three enough and not at least let the Clippers capitalize on disrespecting them as shooters to make it more challenging for superstar players, like Luka or Kyrie, then that is a big lift overall and makes the Clippers have to make tough decisions for how they're going to approach help defense when trying to contain two of the toughest players to guard in basketball.
Yeah, that's to me one of the biggest X factors of this series. And you mentioned it with a couple of guys in particular. I'll start with Exum because Exum this year, particularly in the clutch, has been fantastic. He's shooting 49% on threes and 8 of 12 in clutch situations from downtown, just giving you another element of a guy that's been there and done that. And it's funny, as you were describing with Exum and the role that he could potentially have guarding a guy like James Harden, you think about a guy who's had, I mean, he's not obviously on the Clippers anymore, but you saw what he did the other night for the Philadelphia 76ers and what Nick Batum was able to do to really affect that game, particularly in the fourth quarter. I feel like Dante Exum can have a similar role in this series for the Mavericks, given his skill set defensively, but just some of the intangibles that he brings from a basketball IQ standpoint, but his ability to knock down shots in the clutch that could really be an X factor for the Mavericks to be able to help them, especially as they finish in fourth quarters where they're going to need him defensively if they're going to be dealing with a guy in James Harden when he's on the floor, being able to create it the way that he does, particularly in pick and roll situations and those kinds of things. And then you mentioned it, PJ Washington is going to be a massive factor in this series because a guy that was shooting, 32% from three, he's played a little bit better from three in terms of shooting the ball as of late for this team. He has got to command respect. Him and Derrick Jones Jr. have got to command respect from the Clippers in this series from downtown to make them have to deal at some point with staying home on them, because if there's a situation where the Clippers don't feel like they respect Jones Jr. enough, even though he shot a career high, which is 34% for him this year from three, if they don't command that respect from the Clippers from three in that way, it could be a long series because then they don't necessarily have any fear of what these other guys can do. And then you can make Luka and try to make Kyrie work as much as they can to have to generate as much offense, not just scoring, but also with playmaking as well, because those two will be your main offensive threats. Those three, I'm talking about Jones, I'm talking about Exum, and I'm talking about PJ Washington, have got to have a massive effect, especially from downtown in this series, to help balance things out for the Mavericks offensively.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you were to go along the train of thought of, okay, so what if that doesn't transpire? The main thing that I would be curious about is, as much as we've talked about Gafford and Lively, I'm curious about Maxi Kleba at the 5.
Yes.
As well as, with those small ball lines that they've shown, and even, PJ Washington maybe sliding over there in a micro ball lineup, depending on how, interesting the Clippers want to get with their personnel, because, they have PJ Tucker, on their bench as well, too. And, sometimes teams like to throw out weird lineups out there and just give a different look. And, the Mavericks are well equipped to play big or play small. And, I think another benefit to the series as well for the Mavs is that Maxi would be guarding like an ultra shifty guard that's going to make him flip his hips and break him down and, hit a step back 3 over him. It's more of a positional approach with some of these guys. Like they want to get down and play in short range. They're not necessarily going to take a ton of, shifty step back threes or, just completely have you respect that option as well. Like James Harden is probably the closest that it gets with the step back 3, but he's not like that same caliber of player that he used to be. And he's probably slowed down a little bit, naturally, because he's in his 30s compared to previous parts of his career. But in general, I think Maxey could hold his own in those situations if he's healthy, and the team is banking on what they banked on for much of the season. They kind of stood true to that small ball lineup, if you will. Like, even when it wasn't like getting results defensively, and Maxey looked a little tired at times playing for a lot of games in a row or whatever after the toe injury. The Mavs were living with the results. They clearly wanted to get the reps even when they had Daniel Gafford on the team. Like in Boston, something that they've basically said, or Jason Kidd told reporters, is that if your bigs can't guard the perimeter, you can't play against a team that's playing 5 out. And Daniel Gafford's worked quite a bit on improving his ability to play in space defensively.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure we'll see how much they trusted overall, including with Dereck Lively as well, in this series. But that's why Maxey remains a critical factor overall, because if you aren't confident in a team that you're playing a small ball group or something of that nature, Maxey is someone that you can put out there. And with all the reps that they've got with that group, you would ideally hope that that would work for you, and that he's physically firing on all cylinders, if you will, to be able to move laterally, contain ISO players out on the perimeter when you switch everything. And PJ Washington becomes a big factor in that as well, because you still have that size next to Maxey overall, while you still have a 6'10" center with some length to be able to serve as that switching option, as well as that big defender in the paint when you need him as well too.
Yeah, and for me, you talked about Gafford. One of the things that concerned me as we got later into the season, particularly over the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks, was he kept finding himself into foul trouble, and that can't happen in the postseason. Yes, he has a benefit now of a safety net with Dereck Lively being able to come off the bench, but the formula that this team was able to find successfully was between Gafford and Lively, them playing 42 to 43 minutes, and then you saw the production, well over 20 points, well over 10 rebounds, nearly 3 blocks per game between the two of them. You were getting that third score production from the center position from the both of them. So their abilities and availability on the floor is going to be huge, so that you can find yourself playing that same style that you want to, and hopefully dictating style of play to the Clippers versus the other way around by being undisciplined and getting into foul trouble. I think that's going to be another element, particularly in this series, where the Clippers, can play pretty big themselves. They've got some size and some guys with versatility on both ends of the floor. The way that the Mavericks are able to control style of play, I think, is going to be huge, given what they have been able to do and be successful with the formula that they have of being more physical, being able to be a plus rebounding team during the second half of the year, and then using that to their advantage to get out on the fast break and really try to push pace on teams as they get out and finish in the fast break as well.
Yeah, definitely, because I think that factors in as well, too, from our previous part of this conversation about the shooting. If you aren't going to get high-level shooting, let's say you don't, you definitely need someone who's a high-level offensive rebounder, just kind of making life a little bit of a living hell for the rest of the unit with crashing the offensive boards. Whether it's Gafford or Lively, they've shown the ability to be very aggressive, coming up with at least getting a hand on the ball to slow up the opposing team getting out on the break. But they do come up with quite a bit of offensive rebounds, and overall, more chances in the postseason to kick it back out to Luka or Kyrie, or whoever's open to take a shot. That definitely goes a long way and adds another advantage to a team. But yeah, overall, definitely going to be interesting to see how those styles are utilized, because you also have to take into account as well, Kawhi Leonard isn't fully healthy entering this series. So how willing are the Clippers to play small ball where he's got to bang and take contact from somebody who's a superstar player, with the premise of that small ball group being switching? Do you really want someone who's got that inflammation problem having to check Luka Dončić over and over and over again? That's where it kind of gets interesting on how healthy is Kawhi Leonard. And the Clippers aren't going to tell us, obviously, with how Tyronn Lue and Lawrence Frank are talking to media members. So we will definitely have to see that, whether he actually plays game one as we get closer. It's a little tough to put too much confidence into that one, considering what was the word they used about his inflammation? It was it was something very odd.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what Frank said, but it was, it's volatile, something of that nature.
Yeah, it was very odd, and he
Yeah,
hasn't taken contact yet on the practice court. I don't think you're going to do that against Luka Dončić, playing 40+ minutes in a playoff game
correct.
2 days later. So definitely curious to see how healthy he is, or ends up factoring in the series, because a lot of people like to say you don't get healthier after the playoffs start. So that's going to be at the start of a series of that being a problem. That's definitely a concerning thing, for Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers, unless we're all being made fools, and then he looks amazing. Early on. Who knows? That's why the gamesmanship of the playoffs is always entertaining in of itself.
Well, before we get out of here, that means it's time for predictions. This series has been talked about as one of the more anticipated ones of the first round of the Western Conference playoffs, really the playoffs in general, with some of the matchups that we're looking forward to. I was looking at ESPN's, individual reporters and how they picked the series. It was 6-4 in terms of how they picked this series. I think a majority of them picked the Mavericks to win this series, if I remember correctly, but at the same time, I could be wrong. But that's how close it is when it comes to the split of how people are feeling about this series. Who wins this series and why when it comes to the Mavericks and the Clippers?
Yeah, I'll go with the Mavericks probably in 6 games. Kawhi's injury situation, I am of the belief, just personally, like playing a guessing game, that it's not the not of the favorable side, considering how sometimes he's been able to play series and then he just kind of gets ruled out and you never see from Kawhi Leonard ever again for the rest of the postseason. So that you always have to be concerned about health situations with him when he's on the injury report and things of that nature. So I think I would give the Mavs the edge in general. Some teams end up just getting hot from 3, win some games. They have a lot of talent still. James Harden, Paul George, they're very capable of going off and stealing a game from another team. But overall, the general core of a team having Luka Dončić, Kyrie Irving, both of them have been firing on all cylinders. The team has been thriving defensively as well. They've solved a lot of problems with their roster moves. I think that identity of having that higher floor and higher ceiling, both defensively around those two guys in the postseason setting, that could take you very far. So I'll pick the Mavericks, and I'll just say 6 because I don't want, honestly, to be perfectly honest, I don't want to look dumb. I don't want to say 4 or 5, and then it becomes we're covering a game 7 or something, and we're gonna be like, wow, that dummy picked them in 4 or 5. That's awful.
I'm gonna go with the Mavericks in 7. Look, this is the best version of Luka Dončić that we've seen through the first 6 years of his career. He's got a superstar teammate who's been there, done that. The youth that this team has had and the physicality and the defense at which they play, no matter what type of sports you're playing, whether it's the NBA, the NFL, NHL, whatever the case that it may be talking about. If your defense can travel, you give yourself a chance to win. And the Mavericks, I think, have found a formula defensively that's going to be tested severely with this series, with the offensive prowess of Kawhi. Again, however much he plays, obviously with Paul George, James Harden, Russell Westbrook coming off the bench, Norman Powell, who's a legitimate 6th man of the year candidate, terrific player and scorer off the bench. That defense is going to be tested severely in this series, but I think this Mavericks team is up to the challenge, and I think the difference will be, for the first time, I could say confidently in Luka's career, that he is the best player on the floor for a 7-game series. There are other times where you look at certain series based on what is there and what is not there. This is one of the first times that you can say definitively, wherever the Mavericks are in terms of their series, they have the best player on the floor, and that is Luka Dončić for them now and going forward. So I think that will win the day. The others are going to have to be massive. PJ Washington, obviously Derrick Jones Jr., Dante Exum, to a lesser degree, Josh Green, however many minutes Tim Hardaway sees in this series, and how deep the rotation gets, whether it's 9 to 10 guys. I don't think it'd be nearly that much. But my point is, the supporting cast is going to have to be there and perform at a high level to be able to help this team defeat what is a very talented Clippers team. But I think the Mavericks have the opportunity to do it, and they've got the best player, maybe not just in the series, maybe in the world outside of Nikola Jokic, to be able to get it done. And I trust that with his experience, So I'm going to go with the Mavericks in 7 in this series. Should be an epic series based on what we anticipate between these two teams.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
I think
yeah.
that definitely goes along the lines of everything that I think as well too with the series. So I definitely am going to be curious to see how that one plays out, and I'm looking forward to covering it throughout the whole thing, discussing with you on here, and writing about it as well. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, should be epic. Grant is going to be traveling throughout the course of this series. He'll be in Los Angeles for games 1 and 2. So make sure that you're following him for his coverage. You can find him on Twitter, of course, at Grant Afseth, and he'll be doing a lot of things. What else do you have planned for this series, given what could be anticipated and throughout the postseason here for everyone?
Yeah, since it's really tough to kind of throw out stuff before a series, I'm gonna mostly be focused, with my YouTube channel breaking down video game by game, starting with game 1. I'm gonna take a look at on both sides of the ball, picking apart like some of the interesting takeaways and things of that nature. So definitely, if you're interested in the, kind of nuances of how things, cause and effect, how things are adjusting throughout a series, that's definitely something I'm going to be breaking down a lot on my channel for sure.
Yeah, make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube at Grant Afseth, and of course follow him on Twitter at the same. Should be an incredible series, and looking forward to being able to dive into it throughout the course of this season. Glad to have my man Grant back on the podcast. I know he's excited to be back. I'm excited to have him alongside as well, and we look forward to bringing all kinds of Mavericks coverage here on Inside the Mavs. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there, and make sure you like and comment on the video as well if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. We'll be covering this series throughout its entirety. I'll have my game recaps after every broadcast, of course, as the Mavericks radio pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak, and of course, right here on my YouTube channel and the podcast as well. Grant will be joining me, of course, for every Mavericks podcast for this series as well. For Grant, my name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you later. Peace.